So I'm just going to give a little introduction to the call, what I've been up to, and what the purpose of the call today is. I have 90 minutes. I know some people can only stay for an hour, but I always make my calls 90 minutes because, like, sometimes we get really heated. Sometimes after an hour we're done, but sometimes it's like we don't want to stop now. So I make that extra time. So I've been working with intentional communities and moving around for Europe and talking to them about alternative currencies, value flows, the things that they're interested in doing. And also I've run some money workshops. Michael was in one of my currency workshops, and really looking into this whole question. Jakob also was in one of my currency workshops, like this whole question of, we're really trying to create a better economy, and how we do that and what will we be tracking. And these weekly calls have been talking about different topics that are relevant to the communities I've been visiting. And I thought we were running out of topics, but like this month, people kept asking me questions. So every month I'm also going to be publishing what topics come up every week. And so this issue of creating a community currency has come up in a number of the groups that I've talked to about, okay, we want our own local currency. And we want a local currency to create UBI. We want a local currency to help those who are, weaker in our society. We want it to stimulate our local economy. And my take has been, look, Michael's been doing those things forever. I haven't seen them take off yet. I haven't seen them really change society or make major shift. And you still have things like Sardex and Brixton Pound who've been gone 10 years or more. And still, I'm like, I don't know. I don't see that it's really changing the society or
Quite
really,
right.
Yeah. And so I'm like, okay, maybe that's not the answer. And so really, I want to hear from people in the community about either their successes or failures with this. And then, like, what do they think is missing? What steps has it made? Like, what has happened? And then what's still missing? And then maybe kind of brainstorm together, what do we want? So yeah, that's the context for this conversation. And people can just speak up, as you can tell.
What about in Brazil? They have as I understand, they have a local currency called Banco Palmas. It's Palmas, and you can even pay taxes in that. I think this is not a bad thing.
Yeah. So do you know much about, like, I've seen that example, and certainly it helps a lot that the municipality is involved in it, right? How do you, I'll tell you one of the things that concerns me, which is that whatever you're paying with it, you have to have gotten it, right? And so that means you have to have been productive in the way that our system rewards you for being productive. So if you had a baby, that doesn't count. You don't get any community currency for that, even though you produced an entire human being. I've done it. It's not that easy. Let me tell you, it's a lot of work, but nobody ever, well, that's not true. My government happens to give you like a little grant, but but it's like, now I don't have it. So like the people who really should be, let's say, having support for that important production of people, that's one example, or aren't getting the community currency. And that's where I see the biggest gap is, like, if we really want people to have time to be great parents or caregivers for their older folks, or take care of the homeless on the street, or nurses, how is this community currency able to help us?
Yeah. So, yeah, look, the idea of community currencies, I believe, is a really good idea, in the sense that community being a group of people who know each other. So a group of people who know each other can work together more easily, like, or they can build up trust and what have you. Currency is just an artifact, and the currency that you use, I think, is not important. It's what the people do together that's important. If that's the case, it actually doesn't matter what the currency is, as long as you use it appropriately. So if we've got currencies out there that are actually hard to control, if someone's already got something there, why bother creating another one? Why not just use the ones that are out there and use them? Let someone else do the hard work of making them reliable, etc. And you just use the ones that you've got, but use it as a community currency.
Just to follow on from that, I agree, Kevin. I'm just working on a project from New Zealand. It's just kind of in the concept phase. It's called the Wellbeing Protocol. And I'm just exploring the idea with a sort of growing group of people over here around the idea that so the problem is disempowerment of communities, as I see it. You know, the last 200 years, you know, the free market government have got very powerful due to centralization of technology, and community have become less powerful in relation to free market and government. So it's about how can we empower, how can we right that imbalance, how can we give communities more power? And so this project we're sort of looking at is, can you give communities the financial and governance tools? If you give them those tools and you make it really much easier for them to collect their own data, identify their own needs, will they start coming together as a community? And it will be based around some sort of token, some sort of currency in the middle of it, some sort of local currency. But will they start to solve their own problems and support themselves better if they've got more power, they've got these tools? And then can you also, because, you know, we've got these, you know, in New Zealand, which is, you know, a developed country, we've got all these organizations, these welfare agencies, charities, philanthropists who all want to help, but it's a very fragmented, top-down approach to helping community. And it's a very inefficient system. So if you provide this community currency framework with tools for collecting data, the community can decide to share that data with some of these agencies, and these agencies can decide to sort of provide support and co-fund initiatives via some sort of proposal-based system, all governed by the community. So yeah, so it's just in an ideation stage. I presented at Parliament on Thursday to 300 people, and I'm just kind of sort of trying to go through a bit of a sanity check at the moment, and be super interested from this group as to whether that is crazy or makes sense, or yeah.
Yeah, I just want to welcome the people who just came in and say welcome. We're talking about this issue, which I brought up, which is that a community currency is useful for people who have it in their hands, and they usually have it in their hands because they've done something that is considered productive. And there's certain productive activities in societies that aren't necessarily paid activities, like having children or caring for homeless people on the streets, or things that need to be done but aren't necessarily paid. And I really like what Mark's pointing out here is, okay, well, we can provide data to these nonprofit organizations, and then those organizations will know where to put money in. And it's still like, still has for me, again, this ring of like, we need help from outside rather than the community itself is going to take care of that. And I know that Will definitely has stuff to say to Mark exactly about this issue, because Will is actually doing exactly that kind of project, right?
Hey guys, I'm not sure I got it 100%, Mark, but yeah, I mean, we're sort of working at providing information to aid organizations on how to better use aid, and there's a lot of debate around what that's going to look like, and I'm also really getting much more into like different types of basic income type network tokens and voting systems and things like that as well. And I don't know, what scares me about it is obviously just like getting into the sort of social scoring kind of systems and things like that, which is kind of what that is in a way. If aid is being distributed based on some sort of metrics that we're giving them based on transactions and things like that, like I feel like there's a potentially kind of slippery slope there to avoid. But otherwise, yeah, I think it's wonderful, like that Red Cross is looking at these as modalities to help people more. I think that's really progressive.
Yeah.
Grace,
Yeah.
may I ask you to, since the purpose of this meeting seems to be to change your mind, it would be helpful if we had clarity on what you mean by the inequality that is unresolvable, and whether you think that's an absolute or whether there is a spectrum of possible changes, or it's just right out.
Okay, cool. Good. All right. Yeah. So like you should know what my mind is before you want to change it. So I'm not going to talk about the environmental issues because I think that that's like a whole different category, and maybe we should have a conversation specifically about that. But I'm just going to talk about the social aspects of how I see community currencies. So one social aspect, and this is really directly relevant to some of the things that Mark was saying, we've seen that community currencies do reconnect social fabric in some ways. But my sense of money is like this, like the most common transaction that people do, the most common transaction is we don't take money from each other. I'm not charging anybody for this call. Whatever group that you heard of this on, you've been contributing to that group and participating in that group without tracking who's doing what. And it's the most common thing, and certainly in our family. So most of the transactions we do between people are relationship-based and trust-based. And I would argue that in many ways, money interferes with that. It's like, here's $3, give me a cup of coffee. I don't have to smile. You have to smile because I got the $3. And if your coffee isn't as good as the guy next door, I'm going to go there. Okay. So like, that's like an anti-relationship thing. And if like at the end of dinner, like if you guys invited me to dinner or one of you invited me to dinner, at the end of dinner, I asked for the bill, right? That's like, that would just not make the relationship good. Right. Or if I brought a bottle of wine, you're like, oh, let me pay you back for the bottle of wine you brought. It's what I call anti-relationship. And that in some ways, these power structures that Mark has been referring to have, because in the name of increasing GDP, have transformed things that normally, and Michael certainly argued for this, have transformed things that used to be free to things that you pay for. Like instead of giving your kids to the granny, now you pay for aftercare, right? And so that in fact, in some ways, money, any kind of transactional unit, whether it's a community currency or fiat money or Bitcoin, will substitute for some of the things that we just had to ask each other a favor for. And so that to some degree, anytime, so that's one thing, some degree, money erodes social fabric and creates a reverse incentive of trust. Like, I'm going to charge you for it because I need more money to do the other thing that I used to just ask you as a favor. So that, and then the other thing that I said, like, as I said about parenting, there are people who shouldn't get paid, shouldn't get measured. Like, you shouldn't measure how many hours and how good of a job I'm doing as a parent. Those are things that are like, but that person who's being a parent or being a child should get fed, but they shouldn't have to work for it. They shouldn't have to be trading their hours for food. And because it's anybody who, let's say, is a parent or caring for somebody, the elderly, is going to now be at a disadvantage in any kind of transactional relationship, because on top of their responsibilities as a family member, let's just say, they're going to have to also have responsibilities as a transactional participant. And so that if you use transactional currency of any kind, a community currency included, you can't fix that problem that parents are still going to have to work double in order to have any kind of living, and people who are older or handicapped or incompetent, the community currency can't help them. And even though human beings, in my opinion, have the right to eat. So that's what I mean. That's sort of where my thinking is on community currencies, that it doesn't solve those two problems, like that transactions are the opposite of trust, and that people who are contributing in non-transactional ways are never recognized. So those are the two problems I think they don't solve.
And you appear to be citing that in relation to one form of money.
Yes, and I'd love to hear about other forms of money that could solve that problem. That's where I want you to change my mind.
Good.
I chip in. I had a really nice talk with Edgar Kahn and Tim Jenkins last night, and they both talked about the idea that like over time.
Attention please. Smoking is prohibited in all parts.
Someone's in the airport. Oh, hi, Christine. Anyway, so they both mentioned, and I was bringing it up too, of just that, like, you know, community groups, like, you know, you've identified this circle of trade within people, and maybe it helped them identify a stable kind of circulation. That, you know, I think we've talked about this too, Grace, and all of a sudden they actually don't need the currency anymore, right? And that they've actually had quite a few cases, like Tim also brought this up, and I've seen it in villages as well, where like all of a sudden, like two people who used to be trading a lot just stopped trading completely, but actually they're still sharing goods back and forth. They just don't need the currency for it anymore, right? So I like that kind of concept, and I think even it would be fun to like kind of, you know, make that even intentional in a way, you know. So maybe all you need after a while within a certain type of community is maybe a currency for communicating with other communities or something like that, you know. And like eventually the community currency of you know, and I can imagine there's different types, like Michael was kind of saying, that might help even that process speed up. And then, you know, really gauging when do you actually need this, you know, X type of medium of exchange, and when don't you? And I think that's a real beautiful thing. I like the idea of that, you know, we don't need necessarily currencies or these types of currencies forever for all purposes, and we don't need it in the family like you were talking about and things like that. Over.
Yes.
But Willie, I mean, you're basically saying we should go back to a barter system. I mean, isn't that why money turned up in the first place? Because bartering is inefficient and the matching of needs and wants.
Barter. It's more like you've got like a Greta Thunberg figure there saying, you haven't done your chores, Mark. Right? And that's it. Everyone's just doing their chores. They know their job. It's like, you know, you've got Scotty working on the engines. You've got Sulu on the, you know, like it's like a team. Like all of a sudden they're a team. And if you go to these like old time like kibbutzes and stuff like that have been around for like 4 generations, like they've got it worked out. They do not need a currency. Absolutely. I don't know. It's just an interesting concept to me of just thinking about like the, you know, dissolving the currency concept at some point. And maybe that can be a goal even for some communities to say, well, maybe there's other types of systems like kind of Grace is talking about, like chore wheels. You know, has everyone done their chores? We don't need a currency for that. We just say like, no, you haven't washed the dishes, Mark, you know?
But I get that in a small group, but does that scale to a sort of a large village or a small town or?
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, that's interesting though. Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's, yeah. And by the way, just historically, the barter story is a story. It's not necessarily historically true. People usually just took care of the people in their village, and yeah, the scaling problem seems to be the issue that we're facing now as humanity. Like, how do I know that my neighbor doesn't have food, or how far away is my neighbor? Hans, you wanted to say something?
Yes, coming back to the question of what kind of money, there is a lot of things to clear between the ears, because we are all on rails which don't lead to a sufficient future. And there are at least two kinds of money by construction. The one is the money of the commercial money of debt, and what is the other thing? Plus minus. You have to take it away from here to put it there. This is the plus minus money. But you have in another kind of money, the dividend. If in a family a soup has been cooked for dinner, the soup is divided between all the plates, and everybody can say, oh, something more or not, and there are no movements between the plates. So I call this a division money. And this is it goes by divided. A good is divided by the number of the heads, and everybody gets what he or she wants. And we need more. Variety in types of money that the people who do something together, make economy together in the broadest sense, can find that type which fits best for their purpose. And this is easier if you know each other. But Grace, you said it correctly. It's a scaling question. You can't know anybody in Germany where I am calling from.
Let's hear from some of the people who haven't spoken up yet. What's coming up for you guys? Maybe what are you guys investigating for yourselves or working on? How is this conversation touching you guys?
Hi. Can I jump in? Can you hear me?
We hear you. This is great.
Hi, I'm Giulia from Italy. I'm studying and mapping local currencies and cryptocurrencies projects since 3-4 years, and I share the frustration that created this meeting because I saw a lot of projects in this year, and the vast majority of them is experimental and theoretical since when I discovered them. I mean, they made no progress ever. They just remain some talking, even in a good sense, but of course in a bad sense because they never become reality. And I live in the region where another version of Sarbex is being applied in Veneto, and it's called Venetex. And it's working quite well because Veneto region is much more bigger than Sardinia, so it's good, but it's a commercial thing in a good way. I mean, it's just B2B for the moment, and it will be always core for business. And this could be an hour-long discussion, so I will just keep short. I think that in the coming years, we can have the digital tools to enable local currencies in an effective way in many communities, because when you have the digital knowledge available and at a low cost, you can start having that in many communities. And there are tons of situations in big and small cities, and I think it will become more relevant, much more than have been in the last 5-10 years, I think, because the technology is going much faster. But I think that on the basic premises of this encounter, it is good to say that these are not enough, in the sense that I think that the priority, if I would be the ruler of the world, should be monetary policy at the national level and then international level, and then also local currencies. But given that we can't influence so much national policy, much more international policy, I think it's okay to have both pressures on both sides, so that on one end we have local currencies and community currencies and stuff like that, and then we have groups that push for basic income, distributive policy, post-inflation monetary policy and stuff like that. So I mean, I think we just have patience and perseverance, and we will see good things. But I think we should be more severe with the people that propose projects that don't have feasibility. I mean, I think that 80% of the projects I encountered on the road are just not viable. I mean, they will never work because they are too realistic, too idealistic, or too technical to be used by real communities. So that's my view on that.
Awesome. You're my neighbor. I live in Ljubljana, so.
Ah, yeah.
Venezuela's right nearby. Yeah.
Mhm.
Cool.
And just one thing more. I think that the blockchain space and the cryptocurrencies movement is rightly criticized because it's quite libertarian and right wing. I mean, it's just another version of capitalism, let's say, just distributed. But at the same time, in this moment, it's being helpful in dismantling the financial system. I mean, maybe in 10 years we don't have solved the inequality problem, but I would like to see at least that the financial infrastructure is decentralized, because that will be a significant step toward a better economy. So I would not criticize too much Bitcoin and all the space, because they are doing they are creating an actual not alternative, but they are actually damaging centralized banks. So it's huge.
Yeah.
Stop.
Yeah,
you.
I think that's one aspect. There's the aspect of not having to use centralized currency, and also the aspect of that it's not debt-based currency. So those are aspects of cryptocurrency that have kind of taken steps forward. Cool. Who else? Like, what are you hearing? How is this relevant to the projects you're working on? Questions, yes, buts.
Okay, a quick one here. Hi, Grace.
Right.
I guess I'm interested in valuing, as you were saying, valuing integral wealth, not just what is being produced, but also wealth in terms of care, compassion, in terms of art, etc., etc. So I'm interested in I think the design that a community can make, and I have no idea how that can be translated into currency, but the money as it is designed today just only values extractive wealth, extractive goods, and doesn't encompass wealth. And, you know, other question, as you're saying, older people, how do they, you know, how do we take care of them? Because in a system like this, I mean, they can contribute, but, you know, possibly to a lesser extent than the rest of the society. So I bring more questions than answers. Here I go.
Good. Yeah, and it's not even to a lesser extent, it's to an extent that is difficult to measure.
Yeah.
Right. And I've seen that in the intentional communities that I'm going to. So in some of the intentional communities I went to, some of the people are aging, or some of the people are around my age, and then they're bringing in their aging parents to take care of their aging parents. And it's an issue, you know, like you've got one person who's in the community, and it's not to say they don't contribute. I mean, the way that the grandchild looks at them and is happy to see them and hugs them, this is a contribution. And caring for somebody you love provides you with something, you know, and so it's not that they're not, you know, and then they have wisdom. They might just say a few words, but they might be like, oh, that was valuable, but it's not monetary, right? And so that is one of the big problems. And I've seen it all over with these intentional communities, particularly the agricultural communities, because it's already hard enough to produce enough food for their community, especially if they're using this ecological farming or permaculture. And then you got a few people who are getting older and can't work as hard anymore or want to retire. Now, how do we deal with that as a community? And they're looking for different solutions and finding different solutions. And yeah, and what Hans was saying about what he was calling about the division community, which division currency, which I called the pooling, that's how they work, right? When it's lunchtime or when they're all gardening together, it's not one of their olive gardens, it's everybody's olive orchard. And you can't say, these are my olives and these are your olives. It's like, okay, we have this much olive oil and you take what you need. There's no, yeah. So those are, the pooling is used in smaller communities, and in today's financial system, they find themselves squeezed if they have too many children or too many older folks. And if they want to include, diversity, right? I have one community I visit and they're like, we want to have a place for people with disabilities, but how can we, how's that going to work?
I think I'm hearing a drift here, Grace. Your question was equality. Your problem is that you do not see a monetary response to the issue of inequality.
Yeah.
Is that an absolute in your position?
I think so. I think so. And I think like it would be possible to change what we say money is, right? Like it would be possible to say we're going to pay people for knowledge or just for hugs or just for breathing. It would be possible to say we're going to pay people for planting trees instead of for uprooting trees.
That's politics. That's not money.
Right? Yeah, it is politics. I agree with you. And I mean, that's part of the inquiry. Like, could we create a community currency which labels different things productive than we label productive today?
Yes.
And if we did that, how would we manage that? Like, would we have to create an insulated community?
What you need is very high variety, and you need to keep your fingers out of the machinery.
Say more about that, yeah.
If you look at things like the Ellen MacArthur material on the circular economy, you see the problem of moving energy, materials, water, space, all sorts of things negotiated in a singular linear currency by corporations that have a maximization of profit as their raison d'etre. Within that model, the singularity of the money is completely incompatible with the complexity of the situation it is seeking to manage. Every systems theorist I've ever met who is worth talking to recognizes variety matching as a critical factor. The tools you use to manage something must be as complex as the situation you're trying to deal with. For instance, if you try and ride a bicycle with a frozen steering, so you can't turn the handlebars, you would likely find it impossible unless you're an extremely accomplished acrobat. It's not. You've taken away what makes it possible for the system to respond to the reality. We have a society that is attempting to extract from a biological environmental ecosystem, which has in itself been evolving for something like 3 or 4 billion years in different levels of specificity, and has created an extremely rich matrix of interplay and interaction. And we attempt to respond to that with an abstract, power-based, distributive, me over you currency. That's a dead loss. Absolutely agree. It is, however, my belief, contention, and experience that if you introduce currencies that are actually about relationship and are vectors rather than scalars, things change. That's my experience.
What do you mean by vectors?
It contains relevance to the purpose of the money, the direction. That you can have an energy currency. You can have a love currency. You can have a sense of humor currency. You can have a bullshit currency. I'm going to lay a neg on you. A neg, I fancy, as the appropriate currency for pointing out how incredibly stupid somebody is being at some point. Careful, when I use the word stupid, people think I'm being personal. I'm describing a behavior of stupefaction where people become obsessed with what they're looking at and can only see that. And if you ask them to look beyond it, they say, no, I'm busy. I'm looking at this. And they're blinded by their own reflection. It sticks them in ignorance and condemns them to a complete circle of futility. So getting people out of stupidity is a tricky business. It's about waking a sleepwalker. You got to be gentle. I remember the guy was berated for hitting his mule with a 2x4. That's cruel. He said, but I got to get his attention. You know, now there's a lot of this is about bringing people's attention to matters which we've all sort of thrown up our hands about at some point and said, oh God, that's too big, that's too much, can't do anything about that. Scaling, power, weaponry, you know, all this stuff. Now, obviously there is an inequality of opportunity, age, weight, height, intelligence, everything. There are inequalities. Are those inequalities aggravated or ameliorated, mitigated by the forms of money that we interact through our behaviors with each other? My assertion is yes. You can have a money that goes round, is circular to its network of behavior, and that has a totally different dynamic, both in its composite outcome and in its individual psychology, than a money which is an addictive scarcity. You know, the way you create addiction is you make something important and uncertain in supply. You need this, but you don't know where it's coming from. And that's basically where Reaganomics, Thatcherism, and the neoliberals have taken us over the last 40 years. It's join the game, do what the man says, line up, and be ruled by the money. Well, the way out of that is to have money that is not ruled by them. It is to have our own money, which is money, in my view, that we create by our promise and our service and our interaction. Now, I heard you at the beginning cite that the Brixton pound is not doing anything. No, it's not, it's dead. And so have been many bad experiments in the propagation of community currencies in the 40 years I've been engaged in this process. Nobody knows more about the failure systems than I do, I think. I really am quite experienced in that side. But then again, I remember when I teach my children to ride bicycles. If they don't want it, they can crash anytime they like. It's a question of what works, not just a question of what doesn't.
Awesome. All right, who else? I'd love to hear from some people who haven't spoken, even if just to say, you know, what had you join this call? What are you looking to get out of it? What questions do you still have? Anything, yeah. Go ahead, Juan.
Well, I want to participate. I entered this call because I have heard case in 2 or 3 events past, and well, I think that her point is very interesting. I from Colombia, so I think that one of the main problems that about money and about actual currencies is that they're based on man-to-man exploitation. So I totally agree with her that there are a lot of economical activities that are not valuable for mankind, and that our economicism has commodified everything, even things that shouldn't be commodified, like as she was saying, family or love between communities. And actual money fails into quantifying those aspects. I mean, I've seen very rich people, economically rich people, that is very poor spiritually, or that they have very empty lives. So, money measure fulfillment of humans, but it makes us stand from a different point in the geopolitical world we live right now. So why does the hour of labor of people from Colombia is less valued than the hour of labor from other countries? And why do I have to move between the Colombian economy? I see it as a trap where every value that I make is divided in three or between 3,000 as is the conversion from pesos to dollars. So I see in blockchain and cryptocurrencies a way of avoiding some of the main terms, but it is still a currency. So there are more profound problems that can through cryptocurrency as they are currency. And what I think is pointing is that currency quantifies things that they cannot be quantified, and that it might be economically productive to make harm to humankind. So I think it's a very philosophical question for how do we govern and interact with the world, and how do we interact with different societies, and how can we manage the world as a whole community, not as divided through geopolitical that makes us argue between ourselves and our management possibilities.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and I think also, like when you were talking about quantifying things, and I think the other mistake we make is thinking that you have to quantify things on like an ever-growing scale, like 1 to infinity. Whereas a lot of the things that we want to quantify, like let's say gratitude or love or whatever, it might be like full versus empty. Like I've had enough love for the day, I'm full. And not that you can't give me another hug, but like I'm at least full. And having more than that would still be good, but it's not like like I'm from full to empty. And being hungry is like that too, right? It's like full to empty. And I think when you start to quantify things just on like a numerical scale rather than like full to empty, I've been thinking about dark to light, for like, oh, some things are more scarce and some things are more bountiful. Or levels, right? Like if you're whatever, expertise, for example, it's not necessarily a number, but if you're in if you're in martial arts, right, there's certain levels and then there's the top level. And so I feel like there are things that we can quantify, but if we don't use infinite scales, there's ways to design around that. And that one of the kind of drawbacks of the way that we're measuring money is this infinite scale, where in fact there's very little in the world that actually lives on an infinite scale like that. It's like it's not an accurate representative of a reality, and that if we had more accurate representatives of that. Yeah. All right, who else is here to prove me wrong and hasn't started proving me wrong yet? So far I haven't been, I've been convinced that we could create something new and something different, but I haven't totally been convinced I'm wrong yet.
Oh, that's not attempt the impossible here, Grace. Let's not go that far.
Hey, hi there. I don't want to prove you wrong, but I do want to share something that stuck with me since the last call here. And it's this whole thing of like linear versus circular, and like how to bridge like this more linear way of thinking, which is less and more, and this more circular way of thinking, which is like things are coming and going. And yeah, that's kind of the remark I want to make. I don't really want to fill it in with something else, but for me, I feel like there is the magic somewhere. And one thing I want to add to that, because that's where I'm in my thought process now, it's like, how do we go together through times of like lack, like, and you could compare it with winter probably, if you see it in this like seasonal type of thing, and like and it's about really accepting this like circular pattern of being and living, and to accept it as a group. And how can we as a group, small or big, because I know it's also about scaling and stuff, how can we go through times that maybe there's a bit less of something together, and then wait for the time that there's a lot of it again, like somehow. Because I think on a global scale, we are standing in front of a very big challenge where there's like appearing a lack of certain stuff that are really valuable. So somehow we need to go through these periods together a bit of lack, knowing that there can be great abundance again pretty soon, in my opinion. But anyway, because I want to try to keep it very clean, and it seems like I'm not doing that already. But yeah, like it's not even that I really want to make a point, but this whole thing about like linear versus circular, and like accepting as a community that we're going through seasons. And why I want to say that, and that's maybe an important thing, because I don't think it's always about looking for, okay, where there is a little and where there is a lot, and how can we create flows from where there is a lot to where there is a little, because it's not like this. I think as a whole, we go through these waves of a lot and a little. So there is no this gateways from a lot to a little. We are all in a lot or all in a little in like certain ways. And maybe an add-on on this, I think even this is connected to like spirituality, where sometimes it gets hinted also with what Grace is saying, because I think this idea of as a collective going through this less years or less providing years or months or days or whatever what you count, and then knowing that you're going back to the spirit of abundance, and then celebrate, like we all in any religion will somehow celebrate the shortest day of the year at some point this month. Yeah, so that's my remark I wanted to make. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think that, so this really in some ways relates back to what Will was talking about. Like if you're a community, you can think about what we've got and what we don't have in terms of abundance and scarcity, and their abundance and scarcity in different ways. Like it might be that, this week we've got a lot of whatever, whatever crop came in this week. We have a lot of cucumbers, and we don't have a lot of childcare because we're all out there harvesting. And when you look at that as an individual, you're using this money thing in order to fix the problem. Whereas if you're looking at it as a community, hey, the 100 of us are short on childcare this week. What are we going to do? And the 100 of us are, have extra of that, or, should we pickle it so that next month we're going to have pickles, right? So there's this different way of looking at a communally owned shortage or a community owned abundance, as opposed to my individual abundance or my individual shortage. And I think that there's room, that Gaia is saying, to solve that. If you don't consider this thing that you've got as your individual thing, your individual money or your individual currency, then the number of solutions that are open to you starts to multiply as well.
So it's a matter of perception.
It's not just perception, it's a mechanism, right? The mechanism design of money is individualistic.
Not necessarily.
More or less. I mean, because even if you think about a company, you're not thinking of like how many people work for a company and think, oh, I really care about what the company's profits are. It's more like, am I going to have a job tomorrow? I think that the mechanism design is more or less individualistic.
More or less is a binary distinction, which isn't
More, it's more individualistic. Will wanted to say something as well.
I just put a link there for the, Trekonomics, with Star Trek, which, like the whole idea of kind of post-scarcity economics, right? So if we have replicators, we can all make whatever we want, and we all have an infinite amount of food, and there's no lack of anything in that sense. That sort of the idea is that gave rise to people just having intentionality behind their actions, right? Like you're part of the Federation or whatever, right? You're on this ship, you're doing this thing together with other people, or you're in a village with a bunch of women and you have your community. It's your purpose is clear. You're not there to collect money, obviously. And so one thing it's been fun, we've been getting much more into this syntropic agroforestry and food forests here, and just the idea that if we can do soil regeneration and do it quite well in these techniques that fit into traditional agriculture here, that like food scarcity doesn't have to be a thing. Like we have replicators, they're called plants, and we can actually make sure everyone can eat, and just something like that might lead us toward these situations of post-scarcity, because I think a lot of our scarcity situation does have to do with food consumption and basic needs, right? Like housing and that sort of stuff. So just taking care of that stuff would be great, and maybe some of these local currencies and schemes can help us do those things. And by the time we get to this sort of post-scarcity realm, if that can be a goal, then maybe we don't need currency so much anymore. We can all just, join Star Trek. Awesome.
Or sit under a palm tree and play the ukulele, as I say. Cool. I kind of want to hear, yeah, Tom, did you want to say something?
Contribution. Yeah. I'm not involved in any currency projects, and I'm not as knowledgeable about these things as most of the people on the call. I have been immersing myself in understanding how the economy works through a modern monetary theory lens. And I think that there's a very interesting and different story about what the purpose of money is in a national context. And I wonder, Grace, if you could think of a community as one of its largest structures as being a country that agrees to come together and share common goals. And one of the dominant economic tool used to organize people together on a national scale is the modern construct of national currency. And I think it's full of flaws, but I suspect that many of the flaws that local currencies are being designed to resolve are not flaws in the currency, they're flaws in the way the currency is being used. So I just wonder how, in a way, this could bolster your position, Grace, or it could help change your mind. Because on the one hand, we've got this thousands-year-old mechanism of national sovereign currencies. Because of their longevity, they're obviously working, yet we've got these really fundamental problems with the way they're not working in the modern context. And I think as well, these comments earlier about politics, I think politics is part of the solution to how we resolve those sorts of problems, particularly at the national scale.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting what you said about longevity. I mean, I think about all of these things, and I think one of the reasons we're even having the conversation is because we recognize that things develop. So something that's worked in our lives for 5 years might be time to retire it and develop it. And something that's worked in our society for a few hundred years might be time to retire and development. And I think that that's our inquiry, right? What about those national currencies or nation states in general is working, and what about it isn't working? And and where are the flaws that we want to improve, and where are the things that work that we better not throw out, the baby with the bathwater. So I think that's really, yeah, I mean, we're in this conversation to look at that. I'd be interested to hear from Mark again to see if this is coming back to some of the questions that you had at the beginning about your ideas. Is this touching on some of the reasons that you came here? Because that was really relevant for me, that you came in, you're like, yeah, I have these ideas and I want to run them by people. So I'd love to hear how this is landing for you.
Yeah, no, it's all really interesting. And it's, to be honest, where I've come from is a slightly different angle, different lens, which and the whole monetary policy and some of the conversations I find fascinating. But I'm just coming from a simpler, almost simpler perspective, in that if we can create these tools, we make it really easy for a small community, a small disadvantaged community, and I'm working one just north of Wellington. We can make it really easy for them to collect their own data, to make their own decisions, to create these community funds that can fund wellbeing initiatives. We can make it super easy via some sort of app and some sort of decentralized blockchain-based thing, and we can also make it really easy for them to convert out of their currency into the national currency and back again. We can do all these things, and we can build in a sort of marketplace, like a time bank marketplace, provide all these tools. Then do we empower them, and do they start solving more of their own local problems that central government isn't good at solving? So that's really what the project is about, and just acknowledging that money is, or a token-based value transfer system is useful. That's why we have money. It's better than bartering, so let's not get rid of that, but let's just create a local circular economy, but also acknowledge that people don't live in bubbles. They live in a community, and we still need to work with our national currency. So let's just make it really easy to convert in and out. So I don't know whether that's too idealistic, but that's the kind of the sort of where I've come from with this project.
I mean, you definitely want to look at Will's work at grassrootseconomics.org, because that's exactly what he's doing. So
yeah, no, I'm really keen to have a one-on-one chat with Will.
Cool. I'd love to hear from some of the people who jumped in late, like even just, and there's a couple of people who haven't spoken, just what you came on the call for, what you're dealing with as far as your communities and your community currency, and we can see how that touches on some of the things we've been talking about. So far, nobody has changed my mind very much, although they've changed my mind a little bit about maybe what's possible even with the existing technology for community currencies.
Mind if I hop in? Well, I'll take the lead. Go ahead. My name is Renata, and I hopped in the call as Jakub passed it on. And I thought the question was really interesting. It's something I'm definitely grappling with, even though I'm a graphic designer and not working currently with a community currency, but definitely an idealist trying to, wanting to see the world organized better. And I've asked that question as well, of how much continuing these expectations of exchange really would make progress. And I can see instances in like how it would be a really good mile marker or a good weaning out process from a market economy into perhaps something that was more along the lines of the meta currency project, as I understand it, in the sense of taking money as a flow, as information marker that helps us make better decisions. And perhaps if a community realizes that it's eating X many tomatoes a month, then they know how much to plant for, and without a central authority imposing that on them, but using this as an informational rather than a transactional thing, where if we're smart with our labor and our time, then perhaps that sense of exchange won't be so necessary for our fundamental needs. If we are having food sovereignty or like taking care of our energy production through co-ops, then I don't see how much currency would play a role in there. Perhaps where I would see it more play a greater role is if in a world where I produce my own food along with my community through hydroponics or through technology, and I only have to put a couple of hours a week into that if I coordinate it smartly. And then for picking up trash and constructing houses, that's another few hours a week. Then the rest of my time I can make art, and maybe that I can sell for a currency that gets me a plane ticket or a bike or something along those lines. So this is just my imaginative way of how I would like to see utopia play out. So I don't know if that makes it more confusing or more clear. And just the observation that popped up right as I joined late, my apologies, is when it comes to longevity of things, like there's a lot of things that have longevity, like sexism or slavery, and we now know better. So just something I'd like to point out as how, as we evolve, we can create new things. So thank you.
Yeah, as you were talking about these different things and this like community exchange kind of thing, it's this idea which came up, I think it was last week or the week before, about things that are abundant as versus things that are scarce, right? So if you're an artist and I like your art, maybe I don't want to throw in money, but it's like, you can use my bicycle anytime. I'm not using it all the time. You can use my bicycle anytime. It's completely abundant. There's no reason why you have to buy your own bicycle. And everybody just votes, yeah, we like your art, and you know, here's the bicycles you can use. So there's this level of abundance in certain areas, which is, it doesn't detract from me to give to you. And that those are also reputation based, right? If I know that you're responsible with my bicycle, that's cool. And if I know you're not, you know, so that's reputation based or whatever it is. Yeah, thanks, Daya. Yeah, anybody else want to, like, I feel like this conversation has been pretty far ranging. I don't know if there's more stuff people want to talk about.
I might go ahead. Sorry to have missed the introduction. So what I'm trying again to wrap my head around is that, like, I always seem to go back to Bernard Lietaer, where he explains that there won't ever be like one currency fixes all, right? So we need layers of currencies and different designs for different purposes. And because one of the problems he expresses is that we have a monoculture of currencies right now. So we have like one design of fiat currency overcompensating pretty much all of our basic transaction around the globe. So so for me, it's not a question of trying to figure out the best currency. It's trying to figure out what are the best currencies in what context, right? So to match currencies with context, and then to ask yourself, okay, well, if I have an international context, what's the best currency for that? If I have a community context, what's the best currency for that, and why? And what are the design features I'm looking for, and why is it better than what we have now as fiat currencies, right? So, and the first things that always come to my mind is, first and foremost, control over the creation mechanism. So if you have a nation state that says, I'm the sole provider of the nation's currency, that for me is a problem. And the second thing is to have non-debt based currencies in the way that mathematically you can have a system that's in equilibrium, or that will focus towards that goal, right? And not to have always those booms and busts of the business cycle as we know them. And he gave like just again, going back to Bernard Lietaer, he gave an example of this, that in Egypt they had 1,000 years of non-crashes, right? And while right now we had like something like 450 different crashes in the last 50 years with the current fiat monetary system. So for me, it's about checking what design features do we want and in one context and matching those. And I always go to, well, could we have a tool to help us do that? And to help people implement different currencies for very specific goals. And it's an open question.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, and certainly, you know, we've talked about in this group also about these ideas of fairness versus transactional, right? Like, you know, I'm willing to give somebody a little bit more than is really the price of it because I know they need it more, or I'm not even going to charge you for that, because, you know, and those kinds of things where we want to feel that we're being fair with people and building up our relationship rather than getting the best deal. And those are very different types of economies where people are trying to be fair with each other. I read this book, The Ohlone Way, about the North American, the California tribes and in the Americas, and their whole trade system was you had to make sure the other side felt they were getting a good deal, because that would improve your relationships and your peaceful relationships, and that would make you a favored trader. So it was never about, I'm going to get the best deal here, but more about, I got to make sure they're happy when I leave. And if I don't make sure they're happy, they're not going to trade with me again. So there's a very different purpose of even making the exchange. And that was in a society where food was abundant, where it wasn't an issue. It was much more about the relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, something along those lines that I've been very fascinated with is the concept of gift economics. And I've been introduced to it through Charles Eisenstein's writing and trying to practice it on my own business when it comes to art, because it's a very subjective thing, and trying to put an objective price into something subjective that maybe my art would be totally worthless and not worth looking to for some people, and for another person it changes their lives. And having the same amount of money, if I put a poster up for $10, then it's very different. So having the receiver of the material, the gift, set that price and do it according to what it really means to them, how many means they have. Perhaps to someone is super valuable, but they don't have any money. So $1 is a huge sign of generosity to them. That seems to be allowed for the subjective, or if we're talking about community currencies, one of the most interesting examples I saw was in Querétaro, Mexico. Their community currency included a token that didn't have a value, it was just gratitude. And even though they sound hippie and woo-woo and subjective, it's like we're doing those tokens for subjective things that as humans, we can't necessarily put a number on. So that was an interesting way for them to deal with that, include a token that can just be a joker card, for a wild card for anything you need.
I just want to give one last chance to anybody who hasn't spoken before we kind of do a closing round, maybe. Anybody want to? Yeah, Jakob.
So I can just briefly to give a context why I'm here, because it seems that I will have a chance to let's say set a stage or basis for a university course focused on complementary currencies, which I am obviously not competent on teaching in any way, but I would like to be pulling people in to be helping with different perspectives and kind of setting up the narrative and stuff. And yeah, and then I want to be really getting as much into the discussions and understandings as possible. So thank you for convening this, Grace. Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you. Cool. All right. Yeah, Manuel.
Maybe one last quick comment. Just an idea of when you go back to the different types of currencies, maybe we should have matched our currencies to the different needs of like when you look at the Maslow pyramid. So when you have like physiological need at the bottom, we have a currency for those, and then when you have like safety needs, you have currencies for those, which are different because safety, like shelter, you need more capital, but with physiological, you could have like a let's currency time banking, right? And when you get to belonging, then you get into like reputational. So perhaps another way to frame it would be to conjunct them with the Maslow pyramid.
That's super interesting idea. Yeah, and I know we've talked about vouchers for specific things on these calls as well. That's super interesting. Like, how would you create the baskets? You are unmuted, Christopher, but I still don't hear you.
I was mouthing, how do we create? I was following all of that, and then you said, how do we create baskets? And I had no idea. I must have dropped attention. So it was completely non sequitur. I was like, how do we create baskets? I have no idea. I think so. There's so much. I've got like a whole envelope covered in scribbled notes that I can't read. But I think the one thing that I would throw into that is the process of change from a very long time ago, ancient times, as sort of community and society and evolution pulled us further away from being fully integrated with the ecology that we come from. And this is a sort of process that's going on. And I think kind of relevant to the what you open the meeting about is that attention has changed. What people are paying attention to has changed. So by default, who we were before that, the effect of human community made so much difference, was childcare, were these interrespectful behaviors of sharing food. That was everything, and has become less and less of reality as we've moved on. And as we've reached this last 40-year period of, I think, some quite deliberate manipulation of the changes that have happened and awareness, and as we've reached that, we're experiencing this thing which always happens in these kinds of situations, where you don't know you had it until you lost it, and you're like, ooh, like we've got nothing for that. And it's not just because the thing itself, for measuring it's wrong, it's because we never had to measure it before because it was already there.
Cool. Anybody else want to say a few things? Closing round?
Say something real quick. For this practical idea of just like going and saying, well, we need, to essentially employ some millions of people to do soil regenerative projects and, be able to produce their own food supplies in the next, few years to even stave off massive famines and whatnot. And, so like developing that workforce in the current scheme, like does require some kind of employment, unless you're going to go out there with guns and, become a dictator or something like that. So at the point at which like very, very smallholder farmers can now fully feed themselves, right, which doesn't exist right now for most of at least Africa. And, that's just it's a totally different world that's potentially possible there, this sort of like post, food scarcity kind of world. And I think that's very exciting. And I think that once that's there, like in fact, the entire currency schemes that we're doing right now are based around sort of like centrality of like community services and the food being one of them, right? So you're building these food forests, you're building a currency around those food forests, right? So people can work on that, maintain it, and then use it to buy back the food, right? Well, once everyone has one of those food forests, that's totally unnecessary, right? There would be no reason whatsoever to have an economy around food if everybody has food, right? And so I like that. I like that trajectory. I think that's really positive. And maybe there's other things, you know, and yeah, maybe we want specialty foods from other communities, and I could see that kind of stuff. But I just like the path toward, you know, abundance and post-scarcity in whatever small units we can find it in, you know, and there's probably always going to be something that's still scarce that we still want to create economies around and things like that. But I just like to, like, let's get the basics out of that realm. Like, I don't want to live in a world where I have to use money. Honestly, I don't like using money at all, period. I mean, my entire life, I really despise money, just even personally. And so it's funny that I make currencies for a living, right? But anyways, I just wanted to say that. Over.
Can I just answer this? So this idea of a transition between a monitored, quantized, currency managed set of behaviors into one which isn't that, to me is about, it's about the social community around it. It's about the trust of the people interacting with each other, knowing that they don't need to monitor. Like, monitoring people is inherently rude in some situations, right? Like, I monitor that you did, it's like, excuse me? Do you know what I mean? You did what? And this is because it's your mum, or because it's someone who's 20 years younger than you and you are the lecturer. And it's like, I don't need you to know how many hours I spend marking a week, actually. And I'm not really that. And that beautiful ability to rely on something without quantifying it. But that's a process. Like, there are many ways of getting there, like using a currency to bring in investment and structure around which behavior can grow, which can then be relied upon, and then informal communication and informal community, psychologically based community mechanisms can take that over and maintain low enough churn of members so that you have a real human thing. That's beautiful. And like, I would love if we could get to the point where there was enough, what's the word, the opposite of abundance. And I think we can. I think technologically we're there. Yeah, that would be, I would love that. People to be mentally healthy enough that you could rely on them to grow the food. That's something I would, you know, love to see.
Yeah, it really speaks to me around, like, a lot of times we're hearing these things in the crypto world about incentivizing people, blah, blah, blah. And actually what you're saying is we want a world where we don't have to incentivize people. People just act human all the time because they don't have any, like, there isn't this competitive game going on, and then people just act human. We don't have to incentivize people to act human and humane. You know, just recently somebody had this Facebook post about, should we incentivize people to get the vaccine? And I'm like, do we have to incentivize people to not want to get disease? Like, are we at that point now? Like, that you should, you know, incentivize people to go to the gym and eat healthy. But actually what we've done is created a society where we disincentivize people to stay healthy. And that's really insane. It's expensive to go to the gym. It's expensive to get organic food. It's expensive. Like, we're actually punishing people for trying to take care of their bodies. Like, that's pretty weird. So yeah, Juan, you wanted to say something?
Yes, that I shared a tweet on the chat that for me it was very interesting because it was talking about the feeling of UBIs. And I think that it's important to talk about feelings. And sometimes, even though like what you're receiving is not like a lot, just the feeling to know that you are receiving the same that everyone else is receiving, it gives you like this relief. And that we also have to look for a better psychology and a better feeling of wealth to everyone in the world. So yeah, I really like basic incomes because even though it's a currency, it like enables people who is not profited from the currency system to like yeah, at least have this feeling that they are not being excluded. So yeah, I wanted to share that.
I'm just going to respond to that one. If you like UBIs because of the way it makes you feel, then I really strongly respect that. But if you like UBIs because it gives you the means to exist without having to work, I have a major problem with it. I think that there's a huge amount of work that is needed to respond to the challenges. And from a macroeconomic perspective, one of the worst things we can be doing is disincentivizing people to work by giving them the means to not be able to not have to work through mechanisms like a UBI. And that doesn't mean UBI can't exist. It just needs to be very carefully implemented so that it's still a real choice to work. People still have to work and play their productive role in solving all of the challenges we have in our society.
I would totally argue with that. Like, I want the incompetent people to sit home and do nothing. But but I think that that's a whole topic. Like, I would love to have like maybe one of our conversations for January about the debate about UBI. I feel like that's a real issue, right? Like, because I think what Tom's saying is like he has no argument with everybody should maybe have food on their table, but there should be some, like, you know, it shouldn't be enough to make you want to just sit around and do nothing all the time and not be a contributing member. And again, productive may have different meanings to different people. So I think that that's a, you know, what does it mean to be a contributing member of society? Like, is an artist okay? Like they're, you know, like, and is, you know, like, but they're just making art. Well, those people tend to be the forerunners of social movements. Oh, okay, well, that is in and that's not it. You know, like, what does production mean? So I think that we could have definitely that topic in January of like the big UBI argument. And I like totally, I'm all over the place on that argument. Like, I don't even know where I stand. I have conflicting views with myself on UBI. Michael's speaking and he's unmuted but unhearable. Still unmuted but unhearable. Oh, slightly, you're slow. Now we can hear a little bit of something. Oh yeah, we got you now.
I got it.
Yeah. No, yes. We heard that.
I'll speak loud and get it through. One, UBI is perpetuating the same problem with the same tool that created scarcity. Jordan Hall speaks of universal basic services, which I think is a much more productive context. Second issue, and just my closing comments on this presentation and conversation, Grace. It is impossible to prove something exists. It is possible to prove that it does not. You have asked us to convince you that community currencies will change things. We have no chance of convincing you of anything. However, if you could prove to us that all our work in community currencies was a total waste of time, I'd be very impressed. Thank you.
Yeah, I have absolutely no intention to say that anybody's work is a waste of time. You know, and I think that one of the things that I've witnessed on this call is the people who do work on community currencies are very aware of the pluses and the minuses, where they've actually created change and where they haven't created change, and what the gaps are and what the flexibilities are. I don't think I ever came in with the intention of proving anybody's work is a waste of time. Most of what we do as entrepreneurs and as social entrepreneurs and as, you know, most of it's going to fail. Like, that's just the nature of trying stuff that's new. And so even if something was a complete failure, we learned something. And I don't think currencies were a complete failure by any stretch of the imagination. I think they have created a lot of things. So yeah.
So your statement that they make no difference to equality, have you changed anything in your mind about that in the last 90 minutes?
I don't think that they make no difference to equality. I think that they've made minor difference to you. Like, I think that one of the things that they've made a difference to is inequality between communities. So communities like, you know, where Will works, or with Sardex, or, you know, like communities where there isn't enough cash flow. It's clear that that does lift them up a little bit and give them a little bit more chance to create some more independence. I think that I haven't changed my mind that it still isn't dealing with the critical problem of what we consider productive. Like, what's productive and what do we want to pay people for? So I think that still sort of remains in my mind, but that a lot of the ideas that people are having about how to redesign community currencies could address those problems. So I think that there's been a big shift in what people think a community currency is. And I'm not really sure why, but I can see that in this group. There's a shift in how we're even thinking about community currencies that can create that change. Yeah. Yeah. So Fernanda, did you want to say something? Yeah, we're just kind of getting to the end of the time.
Okay, I want to respond to a couple of things, and I'll keep it brief just to close it up. But following up with what you're saying, I also agree that community currencies are awesome, and I really like studying them. But I don't see them as the end point without the challenging the idea that people have to be incentivized to be productive. And because right now, as we are incentivized to be productive, we have, to quote David Graeber, a bunch of bullshit jobs. Or we have these huge industries like the advertising industry, where I come from, that produces absolutely nothing, and it's extremely damaging to the social psyche. We have insurance companies that are just basically placing bets. So a lot of what we incentivize as work ends up perpetuating a lot of wasted labor, whereas I'm a fan of more the resource-based UBI, so to say, and also that it doesn't depend on a national currency that's also creating all these problems, and then a government dispensing this money that can also use it as leverage for political power, threatening people to take it away if they don't get voted in. So I see a lot of political problems with that, but fundamentally, the idea that people don't like to work or won't want to contribute to having a good work, I think it's just a matter of organization. We've been very bad at distributing labor well and prioritizing our actual needs, and I think done that better, we wouldn't have to work 40 hours a week and have a lot of freedom to just pursue passions. I don't think we really want to be couch potatoes either. So those are my closing comments.
Awesome. So I put the blog in the chat there. There's a blog that has the December topics. The December topics were things people asked me about. So next week, it's like people will ask me about these communities I visited. They want to know about how was my trip. So I'm going to have to come up with some cool stories to tell. And people can ask me, how was it driving around Europe during the pandemic? So that's next week. And I think that there's one more for the following week. But yeah, oh yeah, there's a, it's the Heathen AMA, where the people who do not celebrate the holidays that come at the end of this month for Christians can come on that week and ask each other anything. That's the last conversation of the year, is the Heathen AMA. And for January, I think we're going to start with UBI. That seems like something people are interested in. And reach out to me, tell me what topics you want to cover, because like I said, I've kind of covered everything I wanted to cover from the trip itself, but it does seem like there's interest in these topics. And I'm happy to keep facilitating this conversation. I learn a lot. It sounds like everybody is having a good time, and being with cool people is always cool. So yeah, but keep suggesting topics, because like otherwise it has to come out of my head, and I don't know, like some days I have ideas, but other days I don't, and some days I have ideas that your guys aren't interested in. So if you want to talk about things that you're interested in, you'll write me and tell me what that is. All right, thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cheers. That was great.